Welcome to the Lifeline, a production of Simply BJE. The goal of this podcast is to build, inspire, and to empower our listeners through conversations on business, leadership, and mental health. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at www.simplybje.com/The Lifeline. Now, let's tune in for today's episode. Top of the day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Lifeline. We're your host, life coach and motivational speaker, Bo Powell, social media influencer and owner of the For Real brand, Lindsberg Petway, and yours truly, leadership coach and mental health advocate, Barry J. Elliott. You can visit us at www.simplybje.com/The Lifeline and on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and now YouTube. Today, we have a special guest, mental health professional, minister, author, and community activist, Mr. Rashad Mills out of Baltimore, Maryland, my hometown. Mr. Mills, Professor Mills, how are you today, sir?
I'm exceptional. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, man. So, as a mental health professional, tell us a little bit about how your interest in the mental health journey or the mental health industry began. Tell us about that journey and what caused you to take that path.
Sure, that's a great question. It wasn't one that was very intentional in nature. It was almost a byproduct of some things not happening. And as all believers, we can certainly understand that God allows all things to happen for his glory. So at one point, I was a sports broadcaster, graduated from what I like to believe is the greatest HBCU ever, the illustrious Morgan State University, the national treasure known as Morgan State University. You can tell that I love me some Morgan State. So I graduated from Morgan State as an older graduate in 2006. And I took a job as a sports broadcaster in Bend, Oregon. So I've always loved sports, but I just didn't have the talent to be a great athlete. But I always had the gift of gab, and I always wanted to be connected with sports. So sports broadcasting was a passion that I followed. And once I graduated from Oregon State, I had the opportunity to be a sports broadcaster, weekend sports broadcaster in Bend, Oregon. And I don't know if you're familiar with Oregon, but specifically Bend, Oregon, it's not a lot of people that look like you and I.
You
Let's
don't
kind of
say.
put it that way. So I think my mom was more skeptical in nature that I was going, many miles across the country to the Pacific Northwest to pursue this dream. And my dad was like, man, just go for it. So I went out to Bend, Oregon. Um, and really, really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'll be very candid. And I think, Barry, you watching a lot of my videos, you may have known this. If not, I'll certainly be honest and share that I struggle with alcoholism, issues with self-esteem and depression. And so I'm out in Oregon and I'm just a party guy from Baltimore, just living it up. And the Baltimore ego sort of took place. Like I'm the man. So I'm out here and the people are loving me and they would call me the sports guy. And I would go into the supermarket and they'd say, that's the sports guy. And I'm literally signing autographs for little white kids. So my ego is the size of Texas now. And every night my mom would say, Rashad, God would humble you. God will humble you. He will humble you. And in typical Rashad Mills fashion, I got it. I got it. I got it. I'm doing my thing. And so one night, I believe this was uh, probably February of 2008, I'm out and I'm at a club and I'm drinking and I'm literally a mile away from my home. And at the time, flip phones were the thing. It really wasn't smartphones then. And I got in my car and I'm just completely inebriated. And I grabbed this flip phone and I opened it up. And when I opened it up, and by the time that I got my attention focused on what was in front of me, I was in the back of a Suburban. And mind you, I had this little hoopty and my face hits the steering wheel and blood is just gushing out everywhere. And to make a long story short, failed this field sobriety test. And it was just really problematic after that. This is a small market. And so I literally was putting on makeup to hide my face from, people, watching, hey, what's wrong with your face? The stitches, the whole nine. And this town is so small, they would put DUIs in the paper. And my license was suspended and I couldn't drive out to the local high schools and things of that nature to interview the coaches, shoot footage, and it became problematic. And eventually, the general manager at the time, a gentleman by the name of Chris Galoo, he said, Rashad, we love you, but you got to go back home. Because I couldn't drive and I was dependent on my colleagues. And we only had at the time maybe 3 or 4 cars in the station. And even in the midst of all of my foolishness, God still showed up as the wonderful God. And I walked in, and the day that they actually let me go, Chris was from Baltimore. His kids were born and raised in Baltimore. And he said, man, you did your thing on the air, and it wasn't an issue with your on-air talent. It was just you had this DUI. And he said, what we're going to do, because you came all the way from Baltimore, man, we're going to pay you 2 months in advance. So I got paid for work that I never did.
Wow.
So I'm laid off, and I'm out in Oregon, and I'm saying to myself, God, you are still incredible to me. I still have money that was given to me, funds that were given to me that I didn't even earn. And so eventually I came back to Baltimore, and I'm just trying to find my way at this point. And so I had a cousin that was a teacher at one of the local high schools in West Baltimore. I mean, principal one of the local middle schools. And she said, well, just be a substitute teacher. And I thought that was a further shot to my ego. Substitute teaching? I mean, that's not me. I'm an on-air personality. I'm still stuck in this very non-humble way of living and thinking. So I eventually did it. And I took on the role as a teacher assistant, a paraeducator, and I did that for a while. And it was a kid that I would work with, and this kid was so sharp and so witty and so sarcastic like myself, and I gravitated towards him. So one day we're walking down the hall, and I asked this kid, I said, well, man, why do you do things that you know that are wrong and you know the end result of your choices? And he looked at me, and as Kevin Hart would say, I mean, he looked at me straight face, chest out, and he looked at me, and he said, well, Mr. Mills, I know what I'm doing, but I choose to do the right thing, the wrong thing anyway.
Mhm.
And that stuck with me. And at that point, I said, man, I need to reach these kids at a different perspective. I said, I'm a black man, I'm educated, I'm a shoo-in for Teach for America. I applied for Teach for America. Nope, got declined. And I had no idea why, right? And I said, God, where are you taking me? So eventually someone said, man, you love working with kids and you're interested in how the brain works and why people do the things they do. So you should consider being a therapist. Not so much. But I eventually applied to Johns Hopkins. And I got into Johns Hopkins, and that was the start of my introduction to therapy. Got my master's in what they call clinical community counseling. Did a lot of work at the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center, working with young guys, 17, 18, that were charged with adult crimes, but still were technically of the juvenile age. And then from there, I just began to fall in love with therapy, and everything just meshed so well, so incredibly well, from mental health, and then me being a speaker. And then what I realized is that God strategically placed me, and you guys know this, and this is just, man, I get so excited talking about God. He strategically placed me. So every environment that I was in and every sort of challenge and flawed part of me, it was serving to empower somebody else. And so it's just been incredible, an incredible, incredible marriage. And then I've had my own challenges with mental health, right? Being to this day, I'm an incredibly anxious person, right? Suffer with depression, like the whole nine, like literally. I've been in a Sinai Hospital, Barry, if you remember Sinai Hospital. I've literally had to stint in Sinai Hospital, like after a breakup. I literally had lost it. And again, it was like I look back now, I'm like, God, you had me as a therapist, you chose me. And then all of those experiences have served me incredibly well, yeah, just battling alcoholism, to God be the glory. Next year will be 10 years of being sober.
Wow.
I've been
Awesome.
able to reach young guys in the streets. I had a time where I thought I wanted to thug and I wanted to be Tupac reincarnated. That God said, that's not you. I've been shot before, like got shot at close range.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
Almost tore off my leg. And so all of these experiences now, I look at them and I say, God, as always, you knew exactly what you were doing. So that's kind of a really long story of how I arrived at in mental health. So that's sort of my bread and butter every day. Typically, see about 6 to 8 clients a day in the virtual world. So since the pandemic, I haven't seen a client in person at all. So everything has been, from the virtual space.
That's
Wow.
powerful.
I mean, that's powerful. That testimony is truly what it is. And all the tests that you went through is just a testimony to encourage someone else. And within all of that, you didn't mention that you wrote a book and published a book, and it's called Inmate 458627. Very interesting. A man's story of mental health, love, hurt, and healing. Tell us about that book.
Sure. So the book is again the byproduct of Rashad making a bad choice, God saving me, God protecting me, even in the midst of my own foolishness, and it served later on for somebody else to get the glory. So in 2018, I went to a church, and I won't say the name of the church. I don't think that's important, but it was a church where the pastor has a history of being really friendly with his female congregants, and I'll just leave it that way. And there was a minister that at that time I just thought this was quote unquote the one from God that I would spend the rest of my life with. But boy, was I wrong. And so I started dating her, and I sent some strange interactions with her and the pastor. To make a long story really really short, I would ask her, I said, are you and the pastor, have you guys had any, intimate dealings with each other? I don't care about that. I just want to know so I know how to operate moving forward. And so come to find out, she had lied, and then, her and the pastor had some intimate dealings together. And when I found that out, I was really, really upset. And I called her probably 30 times in a row. At that time, it was nothing Christ-like about me. I'm just be very honest. I was operating out of just pure anger. And I called her to offer a few choice words, and it wasn't like, scriptures from the Bible. I'm going to be honest. I wanted to curse her out. I'm going to keep it a buck. I wanted to curse her out
Right, right.
because I was like heartbroken. I did not know what I had engaged in is really a crime. It's called telephone misuse.
Mm.
And it's nothing physical happened. She didn't hit me. I didn't. Nothing physical happened. So she reported me to the police. So it's considered almost like harassment. And I had no idea. And so I went to court, a misdemeanor charge. And at that time, I had my own show. Every Tuesday night, I had my own show, the radio station here, sort of an internet station called the Power of Purpose Radio. So I walked in dressed like I'm normally dressed. I'm ready to leave and go to the Juvenile Justice Center, do what I normally do on Tuesday, go do my show. Misdemeanor charge, didn't get a lawyer, had this all worked out. And the case was flowing just like I thought. Judge says, hey, you made a bad decision. You were upset. Your feelings was in a way. Nobody got, hurt in the physical sense. All right. So toward the very end, the state's attorney called the young lady up and said, do you have any words to say about Mr. Mills? And she painted the picture that I was Hitler. And I could see the judge body language change tremendously. He sort of tilted his head, put his glasses on the bridge of his nose, and said, after hearing this, I look at you differently. I look at you differently after hearing what she said. He said, I'm going to give you 3 years. I'm going to suspend 2.5, bailiff, cuff him.
Wow. What?
So this is really a charge. It's called telephone misuse. It's a misdemeanor charge. And I know it's true because I did 101 days in Baltimore County Jail as a result of it. And I take full ownership that I was wrong, no matter how the situation played out, but I was wrong. But did I think that it warranted going to jail? Absolutely not. But again, God is going to get glory. So when he said bailiff cuff him, this was like a scene out of a movie. And my heart is racing. He said, bailiff, cuff him. As I'm being cuffed, I'm thinking, did he really say bailiff, cuff him? Am I really going to jail? And so the process starts, I'm in jail. And at that time, I'm, an established man, have twin girls. And this is just like hell on wheels. And while I'm in the jail, I noticed that every place that I was moving, my relationship with God would heighten, right? It would heighten. I already had a relationship with Christ, but it would heighten. And at that time, I was chasing every speaking engagement known to man because I wanted to be the greatest motivational speaker to ever lived. And I don't know, again, my ego was still driving this, right? Because I wanted to be the man. I wanted to be on stages and be seen. And I don't know if God would have got all the glory that he could have got out of it because it was being Rashad led. And when I'm in a jail cell, it literally was moments that it was like, some people said, have you ever heard the voice of God, this audible voice? Well, at that point, I don't think I've actually heard the audible voice of God up until then. But up until then, I think I literally heard God's voice and said, I got you where you need to be. And so when I'm in the jail cell, I had a work release job, so I would leave out in the morning, come back in the evening, and I would change back into, my jumpsuit, and I would go in my cell, and I would do push-ups, sit-ups, the typical jail workout dips, and I would read my Bible, and the Bible just didn't it wasn't words, it wasn't scriptures. It was like, man, this is real now. And it was my relationship with Christ changed tremendously. So I'm in this jail, and I started a Bible study. And one of the correctional officers, she said, man, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen anybody start a Bible study and guys voluntarily come. And guys would just come into the Bible study. And it was like, it was incredible throughout this whole time. I didn't get any fights and kind of the typical jail stories. And God was serving as protection then. God was serving as protection then. And one of my bunk buddies, a big old white brother of mine, he knew the Bible like nobody's business. And I would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning and I would yell across the cell, Adam, where is it in the Bible where it says this? And he might say, man, First Corinthians, such and such.
Wow.
You don't go back to sleep. And then we would wake up the next morning and we would talk about the Bible. And I learned so much about myself throughout the process, still the flawed parts of Rashad. And this very same self, a buddy of mine, one day, he said, man, he said, you are a God-fearing hothead. He said, you still have hothead mentalities, and God still has to work on you. And I'm like, God, are you showing me about myself in the jail cell? And God was showing me about myself in the jail cell. And it was a brother that left a Bible study with me. He pulled me aside and he said, man, if you humble yourself, God's going to take you to places that you'll never dream of being. But he said, just humble yourself. And he never spoke to me again. And God was still showing me the parts of me that needed to be corrected and defined. So the title of the book, the 458627, that was my inmate number. And so I promised myself that my story wouldn't be like men in my family. So my biological father was sentenced to 100 years for robbing banks. So in total, he did about 30 years. I have a cousin that's my age that did about 25 years, uncle, 30 years. And so I promised myself that my story wasn't going to end that way. And so every day, you know, when I had the opportunity, you get in jail what they call flexi pens. You can't have a pen, you know, for the fear of stabbing somebody. So it's this little flexi pen, and I would have little scraps of paper, and I would write chapters down every day. God would just give me downloads, and I would write chapters. And eventually, I thought it was going to be a motivational, like, mixtape that I was going to do. And it was like, no, this is a book. And so by the time that I got out, I had some of the chapters, and I promised myself I was going to write a book. And that's how I became an author. Now, when people say, am I going to write another book? I always joke and say, if I do, I'm not going back to jail as a result of writing a book. And just for the record, you know, I like to have some humor when it's appropriate. I didn't go to jail, gentlemen. I went to what I call the men's retreat. So that's how I became an author until, again, in the midst of all of that, God got the glory.
Wow, man, that's just such an incredible story with that. And I'm just loving every piece of it. But just kind of going back to something that you mentioned earlier, you know, there was three things that you mentioned that typically don't jive. Black, male, and mental health. Right? We don't really do that. So kind of talk to us about, you know, obviously we know that's your space that you operate in, but talk to us about your stance and your approach to men and their mental health.
That's a great question. So for brothers that are interested in mental health, I always tell them the hardest thing is just showing up. It's just showing up, right? It's just showing up. And it's often said that you can't heal what you don't reveal. So my stance as a therapist is I want brothers to, even if it's not with me, to get connected to somebody, just to show up. And I push them hard just to show up for the first session, the intake session. You may discover that there are some things that about yourself that you learned in the intake that you never knew. You may discover that you have a connection with the therapist because typically men and Black men historically, mental health is not something that, number one, we were exposed to for whatever reasons, right? The lack of knowledge, resources in terms of money and insurance and things of that nature. And then the second thing is there's still a stigma that exists. I think it's becoming, you know, smaller in size, but it's still very, very present. Now, I'm not going to mental health. I can talk with my boys. I can drink it out, smoke it out, sex it out, whatever it is. So my thing with brothers is, man, just give it a try. And some people give it a try and never come back. Some brothers that I know personally, man, you know, I'll work with you, and I don't like to work with people that I know. But some brothers, hey man, I'll be your own therapist. I've never seen them. They won't show up. And you know, cool, I understand you're not ready, but the biggest thing is just making the effort to show up. And most of the time when brothers show up and they give it just a little bit of a try, they are able to uncover a lot. They're able to unpack a lot, but it's just brothers just showing up. And I think part of that is a historical factor. Historically, man, if I show up, I might learn something about myself that I'm not ready to unpack, and it puts me in an uncomfortable place. And so me as a therapist, my job is to try to the best of my ability, is to try to make this safe, the space called therapy really safe, right? And how I do that is one of the benefits from working from home is some days I may not come to session in a bow tie. If I'm gonna be honest with you, 4 out of 5 days, I might be in a hoodie. Today, to be honest with you, I had on a Scully. I love Scullies, right? I had on a Scully, and one of the brothers said, "Man, I appreciate you coming to session in the Scully." I said, "Why?" He said, "Man, it connects me with you." I had on the Scully rolled up, like literally a knit hat just rolled up. And he said, "Man, it allowed me to be free." He said, "That's how I like to wear my hats in the winter too." And so just making the interaction very, very personal with brothers. Now, I also think, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I also think one of the advantages as being a Black male therapist, because I'm a Black male therapist, my experiences are not going to automatically resonate with everybody. But just because I'm a male in gender and I'm Black in color, that's enough for some people.
Right.
And I'm gonna be honest, man, it shocks me every day, the practice that I work for, how many times people that are non-Black and non-colored people will say, "Man, I really needed to have you as my therapist so I can see the world from a different set of lenses."
Wow. Wow. That's
Yeah,
powerful right there.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
powerful.
Wow. I think one of the things that I'm really impressed about with you is that you're ambidextrous in that you have the ability to be academic, but you also know how to be average, and in the sense that you know how to connect to the average man. And I think a lot of times when people go into the settings with therapists, they go in expecting somebody to talk down to them rather than somebody to connect with them. So I think your broad range of experiences equips you to be what a lot of therapists can't be, and that's human.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And Black.
I always
Yeah.
tell sessions on the intake session, I'm on the same tier. Like we're on the same tier. I'm a therapist, you're a client, but we're here. We're on the same tier. I'm not here and you're not down here, because that's automatically going to drive somebody away from therapy.
Yeah.
And as a
Yeah.
Black man, I mean, if I was looking for a doctor or a therapist, I'm going to look for someone that looks like someone that can
Absolutely.
connect with me. Because if I'm sitting
Absolutely.
across from a guy that's 60 years old, grew up in the suburbs and white, my connection isn't there. Because I'm
Right.
telling you what I felt growing up, catching the bus and all, whatever, and you have no experience with that. So yeah, just you being Black and a male would gravitate me,
Yeah.
coming to you. Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
a
the 60
powerful
part you
tool.
could probably the 60 part you could probably
I was
resonate with.
waiting. I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
That's
So,
one shot fired, it sounds like. Shot
listen,
fired.
this is a light night. This is a light night. Normally by this time, 50 or 60 shots have been thrown before you even
Multiple
get
times.
online. So let's shift gears for a minute. So, this is a rough time for a lot of people. Some people's because of lost family members and other different scenarios. Why do you think, or what are some of the obvious reasons that cause people to fall into emotional slumps during the holiday season?
Well, you have seasonal affective disorder, right? That is typically when probably going to start around mid-October. And it really, we'll say mid-October, right? So people don't get as much vitamin D, people don't get outside of the house as much. Exposure to sunlight is a big thing. And then around mid-October, what do we see? We see the commercialization of holidays, right? I know it's holiday time when I always see like the Lexus commercial where the husband surprised the wife with the Lexus, and he's got
Right.
the nice
Big
Lexus
bro.
and then a bow on it. It's like, all right, I know it's time now.
Right.
And so how holidays are commercialized, and I think that causes a lot of people to look inward. And I don't have these things that I see that the media is portraying, whether it's the Lexus or I'm being surprised with this or this. And then it's like, all right, Black Friday shopping is here and let's go out and spend money. For a lot of people, I don't have that. And then we see the commercials where the family is gathered around and everybody's smiling and it's hot chocolate. It's this wonderful, 20-foot tall tree, and it makes people reflect. I don't have these things. And as they're reflecting inward, and they're operating from a place in terms of what they don't have as opposed to what they do have. A lot of people, Barry, you talked about this, grief and loss in terms of not having family members around, the loss of people during these holiday times, and it makes you really reflect a lot. So I always tell people, as it relates to the holiday blues, be aware of what triggers you. If you're aware of what triggers you, then you have an opportunity to navigate it a little bit better. If I know that this is the first year without, my grandmother, can I prepare for that? I can prepare in the sense that maybe I want to have friends around or other family members around for support, right? Maybe I want to make sure that I am getting exercise. Maybe I want to make sure that I am getting the proper sunlight when possible, right? Maybe I want to go to my primary care doctor and say, you know what, I want to take a increase in vitamin D right now to kind of help me navigate these times. But I think identifying the triggers, using supports when they are available, are some things that can kind of, help people. And then also giving yourself grace, right? That's a big thing around the holidays.
Mhm.
Had a client today who was really struggling with, I don't have the money. Oh, okay. Well, what are we going to do? What can we control? So giving yourself
Mhm.
grace through these times are very, very challenging, very, very challenging for a lot of people. So those are some of the things that I try to help my clients like really understand. But it's definitely real that people experience the holiday blues. It's not just sort of this saying in nature. It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's for real because I had it earlier. I didn't want to be bothered with Thanksgiving,
Hmm.
but I ended up hosting, had almost 30 people here. My wife asked me, "Where's the tree?" I said, "I don't know." I mean, I normally put up lights. And I think my holiday blues it had nothing to do with the uh, commercialization of it. I think I was just tired from the year.
Hmm.
So, what is your perspective based upon holiday blues? I think you kind of mentioned it, based upon what we see in the media, in social media. I'm in sales, so I had a Black Friday sale. We did quite well. So I think there should be a balance of the actual commercials, but what do you think, or what's your perspective of you think how much of that is contributing to people with the holiday blues?
It's contributed to a lot of it. And yes, I think we all patronize some business, right? So I think it's
Mhm.
important that I don't have a thing about people commercializing, but I think it's problematic when the thought of what you can't do impacts these three things: time, duration, and frequency. So when people say what's normal as opposed to abnormal, I remember in grad school, my professor, Johns Hopkins, said the difference is when something is a normal thing or it's abnormal, it's time, duration, and frequency. How much time am I being consumed by that I don't have? What's the frequency that I'm thinking about the holiday blues and I'm thinking about the things that I want to buy, but I can't, right? Time, duration, and then frequency. Like how much time am I actually giving to this, right? And so I think it's okay. On Black Friday, I bought some things that I wanted, right? I patronized some businesses. I don't think it's anything wrong with that. But I think if an individual is spending too much time a long duration and they're frequently thinking about it, then I think that it crosses over from what's normal to somewhat abnormal and then more of a mental health challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, and but just with that being said, I don't think a lot of people really realize um, when it comes to grief in and of itself that it's a healthy part of loss and it's natural to
Hmm.
grieve. We've kind of in our society here, we're kind of taught to just be strong. And I've even seen people to the point to where they apologize for having these emotions, which I think is a travesty, that we can't not be okay. Like we always have to be on. We can never show weakness, if you
Hmm.
will. However, when does that grief, when does it become negative or unhealthy? That's the first part. And what are some of the keys to being able to overcome and even manage some of those negative feelings during the holiday?
Hmm. I'll start with the second part, the latter part of it
Yeah.
first.
Mm,
Finding some healthy ways to cope. Finding
mm,
some healthy ways to cope. I think coping skills are vital to help navigate through grief because grief is a natural cycle of life, right? And one of the things when you mentioned that it is natural is a great book that I actually read in 2022. At the time, I was going through separation and divorce from my ex-wife, and me as a therapist, I'm being hit hard by it. And I found this book called Grief is Love. And it's a wonderful
mm,
book written by a sister, and she kind of chronicles that she was in college and taking care of her mother, who was going through cancer. And the concept of the book is I can grieve because I had the opportunity to love. And it was sort of
That's
a
good.
perspective shift on how she viewed grief. Grief is only available because I was able to love this person. And so I challenge clients to kind of view it from that perspective. I try to challenge clients to normalize grief, right? And we can, go through the 5 stages of grief, but just to understand that grief is it's a normal process. It's a process that's different for everybody. So your grief doesn't have to look like mine. And I always use this analogy I would use with the young men at the Juvenile Justice Center. I would say it's okay to walk in a puddle, but it's not okay to stay in a puddle. It's okay to get wet because I stepped in a puddle, but then it's more problematic to stay in the puddle. And so to go back to the first portion of the question, when is it challenging if you're staying in the puddle? And a part of grief this is like the hard part of being a therapist. I have to push people a little bit to work through the grief. Yeah, you lost, and grief doesn't just have to be a person. I lost a job, I lost a home, I lost this opportunity, whatever it may be. But we also have to slowly but surely find these incremental steps that we got to make some strides too. We just can't, hey, I lost this thing and I can't stay in the puddle, because then, the onset of depressive symptoms, and it just becomes much more challenging. And so what is one thing that you can do every day while you are grieving that helps you remain consistent and kind of help you move forward? Surprisingly enough, you know what it is for a lot of people? Showering, hygiene.
I can see that.
Going through, bouts of grief. One of the things that we therapists we see a decline in is hygiene. Now, I have to say, because I'm just a very honest person, I don't see this as much with people of color. Now, some of my non-colored friends, you know, they take extensive breaks from hygiene. However, hygiene is like one thing. If clients said they're grieving, I'm going to check on some basic things. Are you bathing? Are you eating? Are you connecting with anybody throughout this process? So these small incremental steps, and they sound really small, but while somebody is going through grief, you would be surprised. You would literally be surprised at the things that we don't have the mental nor physical ability to do while we go through grief.
That's really, really interesting, Brother Mills, because this year has been a really interesting, challenging year in some aspects for myself. And I would often say that I felt like I was in some ways kind of falling into depression, just grieving some things. But what was interesting, there were oftentimes I would just feel like the Holy Spirit was, and I would notice myself, it's like, man, it's 1 o'clock. I ain't took a shower yet. And I always felt better after the shower.
Yep.
Like 100% of the time. And so to hear you say that, it's just amazing that that's actually a thing, that in therapy that you see that decline when people are going through some things. It's like, I always just go take a shower. And I would just immediately start to feel better, and my perspective would shift. It was like I was cleaning some things off of me and starting fresh again. Powerful, powerful stuff. So, man, this conversation, obviously, we already know you're coming back. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Very powerful conversation. But before we close out our session tonight, man, let our listeners know, Brother Mills, how can they contact you? Email, social media handles, website information. How can they connect with you, brother?
Sure. So I can be reached via email. I'll give my email address. So it's Rashad, Rashad, Mills, Mills 629 at Gmail. Rashad Mills 629 at Gmail. And then I am a contractor for a mental health practice called Open Mind Health, openmindhealth.com. The practice is based in California, but obviously I'm licensed here in the state of Maryland. So if anybody is listening and is interested in seeking therapeutic services, you can find me there as one of the providers. And then on social media handles, right now it's mainly Facebook. My Instagram was hacked, and that's a whole nother story. But right now, Facebook, Rashad Bowtie Mills, Rashad Bowtie Mills.
So listeners, obviously this brother's a great communicator, speaking is his thing. So, hey, book him. You got his email address, got his social media handles, reach out to him, whether it's for booking or for mental health needs. Man, definitely take advantage of it. Obviously a great brother. Well, this concludes another episode of The Lifeline with your host, BJE Lensberg Petway. and yours truly, Bo Powell. Now, don't forget to check us out at www.simplybje.com/the Lifeline and on social media. Look, we're on a mission. We want to bring light and life into your household, so join us and let us hear your feedback because it's all about bringing life to you on the Lifeline. You guys take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with host, business expert, and life coach Bo Powell, social media influencer and entrepreneur Lindsberg Petway, and leadership coach and mental health advocate Barry J. Elliott. Join us next week for another impactful conversation on the Lifeline. God bless.